The city was glowing that evening, and every street seemed to whisper the same name: the Grand Imperial Auction, the biggest event of the century, where only the richest of the rich could step inside. The hall shimmered with gold lights, and tall glass walls reflected the crowd of luxury cars arriving one after another. The sound of engines mixed with the clicking of heels and the flash of cameras, creating a storm of attention and pride. Inside the grand entrance stood a woman who did not belong. Her dress was plain, her shoes were worn, and her hands were shaking as she clutched a small brown purse. Her name was Maria Lane, a quiet woman from a small bakery at the edge of town. She had no jewels, no fancy car, no bodyguard, yet there she was, standing under the same bright chandelier as billionaires and politicians. People stared at her with disbelief. Some whispered to each other, wondering if she had lost her way. A man in a black suit laughed softly, saying she must be here to clean the floor, but Maria did not move. Her eyes stayed calm, her breathing steady. She waited patiently. As a guard stepped closer to her, one of them said politely, "This event is only for invited guests," but she slowly reached into her purse and pulled out a golden card. The guard froze for a moment because the card looked official, embossed with the seal of the Imperial Auction House. He checked it once, twice, and then nodded, letting her through, though his eyes still carried doubt. She walked past a line of expensive gowns and tuxedos, a small figure almost disappearing among them. The hall itself was breathtaking. 1,000 candles floated above the crowd on invisible wires. The stage stood in the center, covered with dark silk cloth. The thing under that cloth was a reason people had traveled from every corner of the world and spent fortunes to be here. It was a reason governments had sent their secret agents hidden among the guests. Maria found a seat at the very back row. She sat quietly, holding her purse tightly, her fingers trembling a little. She looked around at the men and women who smiled with cold confidence, the kind that came from power and money. She knew every face in that room, even if they had never seen her before, because she had studied them for years, each one connected in some way to the same story that had destroyed her life. The auctioneer walked onto the stage wearing a white suit, his voice strong and charming. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you will witness history. What you are about to see has the power to change the balance of the world itself." A soft murmur filled the room. Cameras flashed. Maria's heart raced. She could feel a pulse in her throat, but she kept her head low, pretending to be just another quiet guest. The man beside her whispered something about national secrets and invisible weapons. Maria heard every word, and her hands grew colder. The auction began with smaller items, paintings, rare stones, old relics, each sold for more money than Maria had ever imagined. The crowd laughed and clapped. After every bid, the sound of wealth echoed against the marble walls, yet her mind was not on the treasures. Her thoughts were only on the black-covered object that everyone had come for, the final item of the night, the one that was never shown in photos, never described in words, only rumored. As the final item approached, the room grew quiet. Even the laughter died down. The auctioneer paused for a long moment, letting the silence build tension. He smiled as two guards rolled the covered object onto the stage. The lights dimmed slightly, and he said in a voice that carried both fear and excitement, "Ladies and gentlemen, the final piece of the evening is one that does not belong to art or history, but to destiny itself." Maria's fingers tightened around her purse, her eyes filled with memories of another life, before the bakery, before the quiet morning. She saw flashes in her mind, fire, smoke, a voice she could never forget, her husband's voice telling her to remember the code. When the silk cloth was slowly lifted, the crowd gasped. Under the cover was not gold or silver, but a small black box sealed with metal lines glowing faintly with blue light. Whispers moved through the room. Someone said it was from a lost government project. Someone else said it could control armies from space. The auctioneer raised his hands to silence and declared that the highest bidder tonight would not just buy power, they would own the future. Maria looked at the box and felt a tear slide down her cheek. She remembered holding that same box years ago when the world was on the edge of war. She remembered the promise she made to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. And now here it was, surrounded by greed and danger again. No one noticed the simple woman in the back row, but she was not just a guest. She had come with a plan, one that had taken years to prepare. She had crossed borders, changed her name, and sold everything she owned to reach this place. She had one goal and one chance. The auctioneer began to count, starting the bid at $10 million. Voices rose fast and fierce. The numbers climbed like fire through dry grass. Maria listened, her breath short, each bid bringing her closer to the moment she had feared and waited for all her life. Somewhere deep inside, she whispered to herself, "It is time the world will remember, not the rich, not the powerful, but the simple woman who walked into their war and changed everything." The crowd grew silent as the auctioneer stood tall on the stage. The glow from the candles above painted soft light across his sharp face. His smile carried mystery and danger, and when he lifted his hand, the air in the grand hall seemed to freeze. The guards who stood on each side of the black box looked uneasy, as if they knew the weight of what they were guarding. He spoke with a voice that filled every corner of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have before us is not just an object. It is a key that can open the door to power or close it forever." A wave of whispers spread through the crowd. People leaned closer, curious and afraid. Some believed it was a weapon, others thought it was a secret technology lost during the last Great War. One man said quietly that it could control satellites, that guided missiles. Another woman whispered that it could shut them all down. Maria sat still at the far back, her eyes locked on the glowing lines that ran across the box. They pulsed gently like a heartbeat, as if the thing inside was alive. Her hand stayed hidden inside her lap, and her heart beat faster with every word the auctioneer spoke. She knew what was inside because her husband had built it long ago, and she had watched the world burn when it was stolen. The auctioneer continued with a careful smile. Tonight, only one person will leave this room with the box, but I must remind everyone that ownership comes with risk. There are things beyond money at stake. There are lives, there are nations, there is history. The word sent a shiver through the whole. The crowd of billionaires suddenly looked less certain. Some smiled nervously, pretending not to care, but their eyes betrayed fear and greed mixed together in a deadly blend. Maria remembered the night her husband died, a flash of light, a shaking floor, the sound of soldiers shouting. She remembered his last words, telling her that peace could only survive if someone brave enough protected the box she had promised that she would, and that promise was the reason she was sitting in that chair tonight among wolves disguised in silk. The auctioneer raised his hand. The bidding begins at 10 million. A deep voice shouted 20, another shouted 50. Within seconds, a number flew into hundreds. The crowd turned into a storm of raised hands and cold eyes. Everyone wanted the same thing, but for different reasons, some for money, some for revenge, and some for control. Maria watched in silence, her mind moving faster than the numbers. She knew the system, she knew the people, she knew how every signal inside the box worked, and she knew that whoever won would never understand the danger waiting within. As the numbers reached 1 billion, the auctioneer laughed. The sound echoed through the room like thunder. We are making history tonight, he said, the richest minds of our age fighting for the future of the world. Maria felt the room closing, and she could smell the perfume of power, the scent of fear and sweat beneath fancy suits and jeweled necklaces. Yet she felt strangely calm because she was closer than ever to what she had come for. Then a strange thing happened. The lights flickered for a second. A faint sound hummed through the air. It was so soft most people did not notice, but Maria heard it. She recognized that sound. It was a box reacting to something, to someone it knew. She whispered under her breath, "He is still with me," and her heart softened for a moment, remembering her husband's voice. The auctioneer lifted his hand again. "We are now at 1.5 billion. Do I hear too?" The crowd erupted again with louder voices, and shaking hands. A sound of greed filled the room, but Maria was already planning her move. She looked at the digital board that flashed with numbers. She saw the names of secret bidders from around the world, and one by one she noticed small pattern signals hidden in the names. They were codes from her past, from the same scientists who once worked beside her. She realized they were here too, fighting for the same cause, but none of them knew she was alive. The room grew hotter, the tension heavier, the air thick with secrets and ambition. Maria leaned forward and whispered something so soft that no one heard her. "I am sorry, but it has to end tonight." A man in the front shouted 2 billion. The auctioneer's voice boomed over the crowd. 2 billion offered, going once, going twice. Maria stood up quietly. Her chair made a soft sound that turned every head toward her. She raised a small hand and said in a voice calm as water, 2 billion and 1. Gasps filled the room. People laughed, thinking it was a mistake. The auctioneer blinked, unsure if he heard right. He asked her to repeat. She did, her voice steady, her eyes firm. 2 billion and 1. Security guards stepped closer, but the system accepted her bid. The digital board confirmed her name, and the entire hall went silent. Who was she? How could a woman dressed so simple hold an account worth billions? The whispers turned sharp. Some said she was a spy, others said she was an angel. The auctioneer tried to keep control. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new bidder." Maria sat down again, her face calm, her hand still shaking inside her purse where a small transmitter rested, glowing faintly. She whispered to it, "It is done." Above the crowd, the candles flickered again. The air shifted as if the box itself was listening. Something unseen had been set in motion. And while the crowd laughed, thinking it was only a joke, Maria Lane, the simple woman from the bakery, smiled quietly, knowing that tonight the world had started to change, and none of them could stop it. The hall trembled with whispers and laughter and gasps as Maria Lane's soft voice echoed across the golden room. The words 2 billion, and 1 hung in the air like thunder in a storm. The auctioneer stood frozen, his white gloves shaking slightly, his eyes blinking fast as if trying to understand what had just happened. No one could believe it. The richest people in the world sat in disbelief, their faces twisted with confusion and anger. Some laughed too loudly to hide their fear. Others leaned forward, searching for answers, as if the simple woman from the back row was hiding a secret fortune in her brown purse. Maria sat very still, her eyes never leaving the stage, her breathing slow, her heartbeat steady. She had waited years for this moment, and she knew every second mattered. She could feel hundreds of eyes burning into her, but she didn't look away. The box was in front of her, glowing softly under the stage lights, a quiet pulse that only she seemed to hear. The auctioneer finally spoke, his voice breaking slightly as he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new bid at 2 billion, and 1. Can I get a counter offer?" The room stayed silent for a moment. Then a man in a silver suit raised his hand with a smirk. He said 3 billion. The crowd gasped again, the numbers flashing bright red on the giant screen. Maria did not move. She whispered something under her breath, and the lights flickered again. The auctioneer cleared his throat. 3 billion offered. Do I hear 3.5? He looked at Maria, expecting her to break, but she only smiled. Her calmness made the others nervous, like she knew something they didn't. A woman in a diamond necklace stood up. 4 billion, she said sharply, her voice cold like ice. Another voice shouted 4.5. A man near the front said 5 billion. The bidding storm had begun, each bid like a wave, crashing harder than the last. Greed and power collided in the air, making it hard to breathe. But Maria did not blink. She waited until the room reached silence again. Then softly she said 5 billion and 1. The sound of her voice cut through the noise like a blade. The auctioneer's hand trembled slightly as he repeated her bid. 5 billion and 1. The digital board flashed again, showing her name, Maria Lane. The crowd murmured louder now, whispering, who is she? How can she afford this? What is she doing here? The man in the silver suit slammed his hand on the table. This is madness, he said. No one like her has that kind of money. Check her account right now, he demanded. But the auctioneer's assistant whispered something to him that made his eyes widen. The account was verified. It was real. Every digit in her balance checked and confirmed. Maria watched the confusion grow, and deep inside her chest she felt a quiet pain. She never wanted money. She never wanted fame. She only wanted peace, the kind of peace her husband had dreamed of before he died. The box on the stage hummed again. The glowing lines turned brighter, almost like it was alive. The sound was small, but Maria could hear it calling her, the code, the signal she had built with him years ago. The auctioneer raised his hand again. 5 billion and 1 going once, going twice. Wait, shouted the man in the silver suit. 6 billion, he said angrily, his voice shaking. The woman in the diamond necklace shouted 7 billion. Another shouted 8 billion. The room was fire now, hearts racing, voices colliding, power and fear mixing into chaos. The lights above flickered again, as if the world itself was reacting to their greed. Maria stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. She raised her hand again, her voice calm, steady, strong. 8 billion and 1. The auctioneer swallowed hard, his voice quiet, as he repeated 8 billion and 1. The crowd went silent. No laughter, no whispers, no sound, only the faint hum of the glowing box. Maria's eyes softened for a moment. As she looked at it, memories filled her mind. Her husband smiled, the sound of him laughing while fixing broken machines. A day they promised that their invention would save lives, not destroy them. She felt tears pressing behind her eyes, but she did not let them fall. The man in the silver suit stood up again, shouting, she is a fraud, she is nothing. Someone stop this madness. But when he tried to speak again, his tablet went black. The bidding system on his screen frozen. The same happened to others around the room. Every digital device shut down one by one. Only Maria's small transmitter inside her purse continued to blink softly. The auctioneer looked around, nervous, his earpiece buzzing with static. Security guards moved closer, unsure what to do. The black box on the stage began to hum louder, glowing lines pulsing faster. Every screen in the hall went dark except one. The number 8 billion and 1 stayed glowing red in the air like a burning mark. Maria took a deep breath. She whispered the same words she had whispered years ago when she first sealed the box. I will protect you. And through that whisper the box responded. It blinked once and went still again, quiet, calm, waiting. The auctioneer raised his shaking hand. 8 billion and 1 going once, going twice sold. The hammer fell with a sharp sound that echoed through the silence. Maria lowered her hand, her expression unreadable. The guards stepped toward her, unsure if they should stop her or protect her. She looked at them with eyes filled with quiet sadness and said softly, you cannot stop what has already begun. Somewhere deep inside the walls of the hall, the air shifted faintly as if machines unseen had awakened. Maria Lane, the simple woman who worked in a bakery, had just bought the most dangerous object on earth, and the war that had been waiting in the shadows had just taken its first step toward its end. The sound of the auctioneer's hammer still echoed in the grand hall when the crowd began to move again, voices rising in fear and anger, confusion spilling across the golden floor. Some people shouted that it was a mistake, others demanded answers. Guards hurried toward Maria Lane, unsure what to do, while the black box on the stage pulsed softly with a strange blue light like a heart slowly waking from a long sleep. Maria stood there calm in the middle of the storm, her small frame surrounded by power and panic. Her eyes were tired yet strong, as if she had waited her entire life for this single moment. And now it was finally here. She took a deep breath, and her mind drifted back to the beginning, to a time before the war, before the lies, before her name was forgotten. Years ago, she was not just a baker. She was a scientist working in a quiet laboratory hidden in the green hills far from any city. She worked beside her husband, Daniel Lane, a man with gentle hands and eyes that always held light. They had a dream of peace, a dream to end conflict not through weapons, but through understanding and technology. Daniel believed that machines could protect humanity instead of destroying it, and together they built something that could make that dream real. It was called Project Solis, a system so advanced it could stop every missile, every drone, every weapon on the planet by sending one single code, a signal strong enough to silence war forever. But the governments feared it. They saw not peace but power. They wanted to use it for control, and Daniel refused. That was when the soldiers came in the night, when the laboratory burned, when the black box was taken, and Daniel was killed before Maria's eyes. She still remembered his last words whispered through blood and smoke. Find it before they use it. Find it and keep it safe. Maria fled across borders, changing her name, living quietly in small towns, working simple jobs, always searching. She watched the world grow darker, watched leaders speak of peace while preparing for war. She saw the same pattern repeat, and every year the fire inside her grew stronger. She knew that one day the box would return because greed never sleeps, and when it did, she would be ready. Back in the auction hall, Maria's thoughts returned to the present. The guard stood close but hesitant. No one wanted to touch her. The air around her seemed to hum softly with energy. Her hand still holding the small transmitter inside her purse, the same one Daniel had built for her long ago. A tall man in a gray suit stepped forward, his voice sharp with authority. Miss Lane, on behalf of the Global Defense Council, I need to know who you are and how you place that bid. His words carried power, but not confidence. She turned to face him, her eyes calm like still water, and said, I am no one, just a woman keeping a promise. The man frowned, but before he could speak again, the lights in the hall flickered once more. The blue glow from the box grew brighter, spreading across the marble floor, patterns of light tracing across the room like veins of living energy. People gasped, stepping back in fear. The auctioneer shouted for technicians, but no one dared to move. Maria stepped closer to the stage, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. The guard hesitated, but she raised her hand gently, saying, It's all right, it won't hurt anyone, not if I am here. She placed a palm on the surface of the box, and the glow shifted from blue to white. A gentle hum filled the air, a sound that seemed almost like breathing. She closed her eyes and whispered the code that Daniel had told her years ago, a string of words that only love could remember. When she spoke them, the box opened not with force, but with grace, unfolding like a flower of light. Inside was a small sphere floating in mid-air, its surface clear like water, but deep within it 1,000 tiny lights danced like stars. Everyone in the hall stayed in silence. Some fell to their knees, others whispered prayers, because they could feel something greater than power in that moment. It felt like hope. Maria's tears slid down her cheeks as she spoke softly to the sphere. Daniel, it's me. I found our dream. The sphere pulsed once brighter as if answering her voice. The man in the gray suit shouted to the guard, seize her now before she activated, but it was too late. The sphere rose from the box, spinning faster. The air trembled, screens flashed across the room, showing symbols and codes that no one understood. Maria stepped back, still calm, as everything around her shifted into chaos. She knew what the world would think, that she was dangerous, that she had stolen something that belonged to them, but deep inside she knew the truth. She was only taking back what had once been meant to save everyone. She whispered again, pieces not for sale, and with that the sphere vanished into light, dissolving through the air like mist, fading into every corner of the sky. The box closed itself, and the lights in the hall dimmed, returning to calm. The crowd was silent, staring at her as if they had just witnessed a miracle. Maria turned to leave, her steps slow but steady behind her. The black box no longer glowed its purpose, complete. Its power returned to where it belonged. As she walked past the guard, she whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, Daniel, I kept my promise. And somewhere deep within her heart she felt his voice reply, you did. The world would wake tomorrow with no idea what had happened that night, but for the first time in years the sky above the city seemed clear, and for a moment even the stars looked peaceful. The room was filled with silence. After the light faded, every guest stood frozen, their eyes wide, their breaths shallow, as if the air itself had been taken away. The black box sat quietly on the stage, no longer glowing, no longer humming, only still and cold, as though it had gone to sleep again. The auctioneer stood pale, unable to speak. The guards looked to each other, waiting for orders, but no one knew what to do. Maria Lane stood there with her hands by her side, her face calm, though her heart felt heavy. She had done what she came to do, yet she knew it was not over. The world outside still hungered for power, still believed in the noise of control. And fear, she looked at the sphere of light that had vanished moments ago and whispered softly into the air, Daniel, I hope you can see me now. The tall man in the gray suit stepped forward again, his voice hard but shaking. What did you do? He said, what did you release? His words cut through the silence like a blade. Maria turned to him slowly, her eyes soft and tired. She said quietly, I didn't release destruction, I released truth. The man frowned. What truth? What did you put into the sky? His voice growing louder, desperate. Maria took a step closer to him and said something that made the entire room lean forward. Every weapon on this planet just went silent. Every code, every signal, every system that feeds on war is gone. Gasps filled the air. People shouted at once, disbelief, panic, anger. Some grabbed the devices, trying to connect to networks that no longer existed. Some ran toward the doors. Others simply stood still, their faces white with fear of the world, as they knew it was changing and they could not stop it. The auctioneer dropped his hammer, his voice cracking as he spoke. This cannot be real. This is impossible. We need to contact the government. Someone must do something. But his words faded into the noise of confusion around him. Maria moved through the chaos quietly as if walking through a dream. She reached the stage and placed her hand gently on the box. Again the surface was cold now like stone. The heartbeat of the machine was gone forever. She smiled faintly, knowing that it had served its purpose. The man in the gray suit shouted again, Guard, stop her, she's dangerous. But the guards did not move. Something in their eyes had changed. They had seen the light, they had felt it. They looked at Maria not as an enemy, but as someone they could not harm. One of them whispered softly, she ended it, she really ended it. Maria turned back to the crowd, her voice soft, yet it carried through the entire hall. "I did not come here to fight you or to take what is yours. I came to finish what my husband started. The dream of peace of the world forgot, and now it is done." Her words echoed, and for a moment the noise died down. People stared at her in disbelief, trying to understand how a woman so simple, so ordinary, could hold the power to silence every weapon in existence. The woman in the diamond necklace sank into her chair, whispering to herself, "She is not human. She is a ghost sent by fate." The man in the silver suit clenched his fist, but his anger meant nothing now. His power had vanished like dust in the wind. Outside the auction hall, sirens began to wail. Helicopters circled the city, but none of their systems worked. The engines spun and fell quiet. Soldiers on distant borders found their weapons locked. Machines stopped moving. Rockets turned to dust in the air. The world was falling into silence, a silence not of fear but of peace. Maria stepped down from the stage and walked toward the exit, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. The man in the gray suit followed her, shouting questions, but she did not turn. She whispered only one thing over her shoulder: "You cannot control peace, you can only live with it." As she reached the door, one of the guards handed her a small folded paper. Confused, he said, "This was in your seat. We don't know how it got there." Maria opened it, and her eyes filled with tears. Inside was a handwritten note. It said, "Well done, my love. Now rest." The writing was Daniel's. For a moment her heart stopped. She looked toward the window where the first light of dawn was breaking across the sky. The clouds glowed with soft gold, and in that glow she thought she saw him standing, smiling at her, the same smile she had missed for years. She whispered thank you and stepped into the light. Behind her the hall was chaos, reporters rushing in, guards shouting, phones ringing without connection, leaders trying to reach invisible lines. But Maria did not hear any of it. The city outside felt different. Children pointed to the sky where faint trails of silver light still danced, slowly fading away like stars in the morning sun. She walked quietly down the street, past people who did not know her, past shops that were just opening for the day, past the smell of fresh bread from a small bakery window. She smiled at the smell because it reminded her of home. She stopped in front of the shop window and looked at her own reflection, a simple woman with tired eyes and gentle hands. She whispered to herself, "The war is over." As she stepped inside the small bakery, the bells above the door chimed softly. The oven was warm and the shelves empty, waiting to be filled. She tied her apron again, as if nothing had changed, even though the whole world had. The child from next door ran in, smiling, asking, "Miss Maria, did you win the big game last night? Everyone's talking about it." She smiled gently, kneeling down to his height, and said, "I didn't win anything, little one. I just helped everyone stop losing." The child laughed, not understanding, and she joined in her laughter light and soft, filling the bakery with peace for the first time in many years. The morning sun rose over the city, painting the sky in soft gold and quiet pink. The world that had once trembled under the shadow of war now stood in strange silence. No bombs, no sirens, no sound of machines, only the gentle hum of life returning slowly to what it had forgotten: peace.